All right,
Yeah,
we just went live. So this is our second attempt. I hope you guys are joining us again. This is our X-Rite Summer Full of Color Hangout with Chris Orwig, and this time we actually have Chris. So
yeah,
it's a
work.
good place to start. So thanks for doing this, Chris. And
Yeah, yeah,
let's see. So like I mentioned, this is X-Rite Summer Full of Color, and when I heard that first person's photography, I thought of was you because your photography makes me want to be at the beach every
yeah,
time I see
yeah.
it. And you can
Me
see
too.
you got a surfboard hanging behind you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I do, just in case.
Yeah. So I heard that you just got back from Hawaii. So I want to hear a little bit
Yeah,
about that before we delve into photography.
yeah, yeah. And I brought a couple photos from that, but yeah, we were on the island of Kauai. It was unreal. Have you been to Kauai by
I have
chance?
not. I wish.
Okay. Well, it's kind of how you imagine Hawaii should be, and got to visit some friends that were out there too. So it was really fun. I have three daughters. We're at 10, 8, and 2.5. So just fun ages, for
That's a
the
good time to be at
yeah,
the beach.
yeah, yeah,
Cool. So, well, let's see. We'll get into it slowly with the photography. This question
sure.
I've been wanting to ask you for a
Okay,
while because as
yeah,
photographers we're pretty lucky that we get to combine more sometimes more than two, but a lot of times two things we really love in life. So
sure.
for you, which came first? Was it surfing or was it photography?
Yeah, yeah, it's a great question. And I always, with that question, I'll answer it in 1 second. But
Sure,
I remember I had this conversation with Steve McCurry, the guy who photographed the Afghan girl, one of the most famous portraits of all time.
of course.
And I was talking to him, I said, Steve, what advice do you have for my aspiring photography students? And he said, I kind of think they should just give up. I was like, what? And I think, what do you mean? He said, well, most people are more interested in watching a football game than doing photography because photography is hard work. And then we got into the conversation. He said, the trick with photography is if you love football and watching football games, and shoot football, and do like combine the two, right? And that ends up being for photographs because people can tell when it means something. So
Right.
anyway,
Yeah.
that always meant something to me, and it was funny. I sort of knew it in my head, but not necessarily in my heart. And I was talking with one of my students about this photo project, and he was like, "Chris, you got to shoot more surfing stuff and portraits of surfers." And it was like, "You're right." And so I think sometimes what happens is, you dodge the stuff that's closest to you because it seems too easy or something. Kind of like in your hometown, you don't do the tourist stuff because it's always
Oh,
there.
that's
But
a really good way of putting it. Yeah.
someone comes into town, they're like, "Have you seen the Golden Gate Bridge or whatever?" And you say, "Well, no, let's go." And anyway, it took a student of mine to really teach me that lesson, and Steve McCurry's comment that I've been thinking about. So it came later. It's kind of a late bloomer with that one.
Cool.
But I'm grateful for the student, that one kid, and also Steve for his thoughts on that.
That's awesome. I really like the way you explain that. That's a really good point, right? That I think people could feel it when you're shooting something that you really connect with.
Yeah,
And sometimes that's harder to find than the actual technical part of it, right? Like you can get the technical part of the photography down, but if you don't have that connection, then, something's lacking. Even if you can't describe it, it's
yeah,
lacking.
yeah,
So,
yeah. And I think too, at least for me, I don't know other folks, but having the connection even when it's stuff that's kind of obvious to you, or meaning I'm going to go back to Golden Gate Bridge because I grew up by San Francisco. But I had one travel photography friend say, you go out and the first few photographs are the postcard shots, and then you do the work of the photographer. And so even for the stuff you've seen 1,000 times, or the beach that I've been to 1,000,000 times, that you I don't know what that was like.
I think we have someone joining from in the car.
Yeah, awesome. Um, just driving and hanging out. I love it. But
Yeah.
anyway, that you have that connection. You say like, no, how do I see this new? How is this, not just obvious? And that's kind of the work of a photographer, right? It's to have that
Right.
freshness, that connection, and all those things. So yeah,
Well, it's that difference between taking pictures and making photos, right?
yeah, yeah,
It's that other thing that's hard to describe. So that's really cool.
yeah, yeah.
So on onto the shootings part. I know we are here for X-Rite, so I got to ask you about gear.
Yeah.
But before we get into anything digital, I saw a video of you shooting with a beautiful large format camera.
Yeah, yeah.
So could you tell me a little bit about why you
Yeah, yeah,
still bring
yeah.
that?
No, that was fun. I also got to say, I mean, I said it earlier. I love the trees in the background. It's so cool. It looks
Yeah,
like,
this is our White Plains office of Mac Group, and that's our parking lot behind me.
love it though, man. I
It's a
want to.
beautiful day out here. Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing. Here, I'm in Santa Barbara, and it's a beautiful day. I don't know if you can see, but the sun is just like pouring into the windows.
Yeah, and I can see a bit nice sailboat model back there too.
Oh yeah, yeah. Okay, what were we talking about?
I was asking you about that beautiful large format camera.
Yeah, yeah, large format. Yeah, so yeah, that's a wooden brass camera. There's something I don't know that's special. I think about using those type of cameras. Where they're more simple, and to equate it, I think to maybe music or I don't know, sport or something. To music, it's like playing a really old guitar that has history, and you know who played it before you. Or anyway, it slows you down. It makes you think and makes you appreciate the imperfection. And I think the trick with cameras is that they're so perfect, and that when you make mistakes, they're so big. Meaning, let's say you overexpose. The blinking thing tells you overexposed, and it's like such a warning. But when you overexpose on that large format camera, you have no clue till a week later.
Yeah.
You're like, I can't.
Can I scan this? What do I do now? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. But that's a nice process, the whole slow down thing. I think that's a great thing to do for anyone, and then to try to bring that to the digital space. Whether you're using your iPhone or whatnot, to try to say, okay, well, what if I were to slow down right now? And really think about it. And being that it's summer, a lot of people travel and go to Italy and say that light in Italy is so amazing, but it's only amazing because they've slowed down and they notice it. And so I think that is the beauty of summer, is you actually stop and you notice and you breathe. And so anyway, that's a long answer.
No, that's exactly I feel the exact same way, and like I've had to recently got a hold of a 4x5. My father had an 8x10 and stuff like that, and so I miss those cameras. But it's interesting what you said about like the iPhone and stuff like that. People always say like, digital killed this, all that sort of stuff. But I'm like, oh, can't you use them both when you feel like it? I mean, like they're still around. You can, for whatever project needs, you could use that. And I think that's what was so cool when I saw you with the big camera. I was like, yes, yeah, he gets it the same way, where it's like, certain projects call for certain cameras, and ones that force you to slow down like that, I think are so cool. But then sometimes just shooting from the hip, an iPhone camera is good for that.
It's amazing. Yeah, I think it's kind of a both and versus one kills another. For me at least, it's I'm trying to think of a good example. I can't quite think of one, but I'm going to go to surfing just because we're in summer. We mentioned that. And,
yeah.
This surfboard was a Father's Day present. From my kids, and I use it. It's great, but it's like in surfing, there's different design surfboards. Some are more retro for cruising. Some are more for more aggressive surfing. And I think in that sport, changing it up is really fun. Or maybe more common would be biking, like road biking is so focused, and mountain biking or beach cruising. Anyway, it's fun to mix it up.
I agree. Yeah, I think more people should step outside of their one DSLR box and play around with something.
Yeah, and or just grab a friend's camera and try it. And all of a sudden you realize, like, shoot, I don't know how this thing works. So.
And it's gear. Photographers love gear, right?
That's true.
So when you shoot, what do you typically, besides when you're not shooting the big guy, what do you typically bring with you, like a beach shoot?
Yeah, I mean, I have kind of a drawers of my stuff next to me, but the two cameras I use most are Canon 5D Mark III, kind of workhorse ones. I've been experimenting more with GoPros, those are so fun, but more that's been playing. And to tell you the truth, like, I'm not good with GoPros, and I need someone to teach me how to really think that way. But that's a fun challenge, to try something and realize this is a very different way of thinking and framing. And but then 5D Mark IIIs I mentioned, and then kind of normal lenses, but I like fixed focal lengths, 35, 50, 85. I also like 70 to 200, but that's probably the stuff I use most. and then I have some other film cameras too
Cool.
that break out. Sometimes I'll bring a film camera with me on a shoot just because you have to wind it, you have to slow down. Even if I just take a few shots that won't be used for whatever reason, I just like it reminds me, it connects me to it a little bit. So
Yeah, yeah, that's true. Yeah, I recently found I was in a camera shop, and they had the big counters of used cameras, and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
I saw like the original film DS, SLR that I had, and I was like, oh my God. And I went home and I dug it out, and I still have it somewhere, and I was like, it still had film in it, and it was like, yeah, it all came rushing back. It's crazy how like as photographers, and I mean, I'm super guilty of it. I love,
yeah.
the new
Of
D810
course.
comes out, and I'm like, oh, how do I get my hands on that?
Yeah,
But
yeah,
like having those tools around that are just like we said, change it up a little bit. And
right,
we all do it, like you said. You have drawers of your stuff. How many photographers just have that stuff just sitting there?
right.
It's a good thing to throw into a bag and play around with.
Yeah, yeah. And I like, good friend David Duchemin who always says gear is good, vision is better. Yeah, I try to remember
I like
those
that.
words. Gear is great, but you got to have the vision, otherwise it's just gear, and it doesn't get very far. And sometimes I found it's worthwhile too to even step down in quality of gear. So when you shoot, say with that 5D Mark III, I get so used to the file,
Hmm.
the quality of it, that I kind of take it for granted. But then I'll go and shoot with a friend's, really entry level camera just for the heck of it, and I realize, wow, my camera's amazing.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, that's the same
just,
exact thing. I have a friend that wanted to borrow a camera, and I was like, well, you could take my old, D70, and I was making
yeah,
sure it worked, and I was like, whoa. I felt like parts of my fingers had been cut off because I was like, it doesn't do what I want it to do.
yeah,
So it
yeah,
really makes
yeah,
you appreciate the gear you have.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Cool. So I
It's
wanted to talk a little bit about post-production because
sure.
you teach on it quite often, and
Yeah,
I actually worked as a post-production artist for like the last 10 years before I worked at
okay,
x-rite. And so I
awesome.
want to read a quote I found that says, you have to be really careful to hide your tracks in order to make the post-production work look honest, authentic, and full of life,
Yeah,
which was from you. You said that in an interview a little while, and that was something I always agreed with. I saw that and I was like, yes, exactly. I always used to tell the retouchers that worked under me,
yeah,
if you're doing it right, it'll look like you did nothing at all.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I think that is like such an important philosophy to get out there in a world of crazy retouching, because it
yeah,
really
yeah.
can be. I mean, you see it you probably see it. It makes you as crazy as I do. Sometimes you're just like, you could just don't
Right,
don't go
right, right.
nuts, and it'll say
Yeah,
so much more. So if you had, I mean, besides going overboard, if you had
sure.
one mistake you see people, maybe your students or people in general,
Yeah,
make pretty often in post that you could correct, what would you be? What would you think is the most people? I mean, even if they're not thinking of it, something people don't
yeah,
think of in post that you would say, hey, try and be a little better. This will help a lot.
yeah. Well, I'll answer it kind of an odd way, but
Good for me.
post-production shifted obviously a lot more towards Lightroom, camera and all that. And so one of the mistakes, which I've started to see a lot more now, is that people get images about 80 or 90% complete, and they're missing that little finishing touch. And part of that's because they're just not using Photoshop or not using it as much. And so that's kind of interesting. It used to be like Photoshop was so overused that was a problem. Now I almost think it's underused. I hate to I'm surprised to hear myself say that,
Yeah, it's interesting.
but that there's certain things you can just do better there, and to really embrace that and to know like, okay, now's the time to do that little teeny thing. So anyway, that's one. Um, Another one, I mean, there's really common things, but it's like they get so focused on one area they forget another.
Hmm.
Um, so I think stepping back, rather than just zooming in the whole time, but pulling back, that's really important to make sure the whole thing's good.
Yeah, when I was working on images, I would, and one wasn't like clicking, just like you
Yeah,
said, like it was almost there. What I would do
yeah,
is I would leave it as my background, and then I would go home for the day. And then I would
yeah,
come in the next morning, and I would hit the mouse, and it would open up, and I would see it, and I'd be like, oh, it was right there the whole time. Like
yeah,
I wasn't,
yeah,
I was way too focused in on one spot, and I just missed it. And so yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
exactly, stepping back is so important because you can just get so wrapped in.
Right, right. And you can almost yeah, the more you retouch, and I don't know if this is true for you, but for me, like the more you retouch, then you're all of a sudden like, oh, well, I got to do that, and then that, and then that, and that gets you to overdoing it, you know. But to realize, like I love that idea of just letting the image live, coming back, but then also um, turning off your retouching. A lot of my students, like I'll sit down with them and they'll be really excited. And I'm like, oh no, okay. And so let's turn off your layers. You know, here's the image. Okay, let's see where it went. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh my gosh, I went too far. But once you stack those layers up, I think sometimes you get caught up. You kind of what's the saying? Like believing your own.
Oh yeah.
Like I'm doing great. I'm doing great. I'm doing great. But anyway, so just stepping back.
It's interesting, right? Where I would have that too, where you'd start following it, right? And there'd always be this like sort of precipice that I would get to, right? Where I'm like, if I keep going, I'm changing the entire image. You know what I mean? Like what I originally started with is going to be gone. Is it going to be better? And you know, sometimes the answer is yes. You know, sometimes you let yourself go a little crazy, and you're like, oh, that came out great. And other times you're like, this isn't what I was going for in the camera at all. Like I followed that rabbit down the retouching hole, and then it took it somewhere it shouldn't have gone. And just start turning those layers off and be like, all right, here is where I jumped off. Like here is where like I was just like, oh, I'm gonna put this on and then this on and then this on and just keep going, and you're like, it wasn't it at all. Exactly. So it's an interesting process because it's a very. Do you find it to be a different process than shooting? Like I found that working and retouching so long actually changed the way I shot, and I had to go back because I caught myself just taking raw footage basically. Like I was out there and I was just taking all the information I would need to create the image later, and that's a totally different process. So like I had to go back and change it. So do you find that like because not a lot of photographers do the post and the shooting. You know, some of them split it up. So I think you're sort of like you do the same thing. So do you find that like getting into the post changed the way you shot?
Yeah, definitely. And you know, someone I look up to a lot, another friend is a guy named Eric Almus, whose work's amazing. And he doesn't do all of his posts, but a lot of it. And he started out doing a lot of it. And anyway, one of the things he talks about that whole idea. We've had these conversations about how when you become aware of the post-production process, you can't not think of that when you're shooting, you know, from a lot of different levels. But one of them for me was just time. And that's what made me want to become a better photographer. I think I was probably better at Photoshop first and then photography second. But I realized, you know, just from a time perspective, I didn't want to lose all that time correcting things, you know, so the whole get it right on camera type thing was very meaningful. It wasn't just like theory.
Right.
So yeah. And composition too. It's constantly, you know, when you crop something, I'm always thinking like, okay, why didn't I do that on camera? You know. And if I had done it on camera, then I wouldn't have this issue over here. You know, this corner I have to fill in or whatever. So yeah, it changed. It definitely changes.
It's a fine line, right? I mean, between I'll fix it later, which isn't a good mentality, or there's another way you could go. It's like, oh, I could do this if I just bracket. Like if I bracket these extra 2 shots, I'm going to have all this extra sky information to put in later or something like that. Yeah. But it's a fine line, but yeah, it's between creativity and letting yourself kind of slip a little bit.
Yeah, and maybe it's like it's kind of finding the right spot where I'm just going to go to backpacking. I'm going to switch sports.
Yeah.
Back in the summertime. We're in summer.
Exactly. Summer full of color.
You think of, like a colorful backpack heading up to the mountains in the backcountry. But anyway, it's how full do you fill the pack, right? You know, and when you're a rookie at backpacking, you're just like so bogged down with weight. But then there's a lot of these people doing this ultralight stuff now, which is amazing. And I think photography is shifting that direction, even with our the Micro Four Thirds and all those, you know, these smaller cameras that are amazing, mirrorless stuff. Anyway, same thing with post-production, same thing with shooting, is making sure just because you can doesn't necessarily mean you do, you know, and to try to find the right weight for you. Because some guys like having their pack full of everything, you know. But for me, I found I'm always better when I do a little bit less than I think I should. Meaning shoot a little bit less, do a little bit less Photoshop work than I think, you know, and tends to work out better.
Cool. Well, while we're on the Photoshop
Mhm.
topic, I gotta
Yeah,
ask the plugins question. It's like what's in your gear bag for the shooting
yeah,
part?
yeah,
Like
yeah.
what's in your plugins folder in Photoshop? What do you like to work with?
Yeah, yeah. I use all the Nick software. Those are
Hi
amazing.
Google.
Yeah, yeah. Hey, thanks. Um, yeah, they're just strong, and I don't really have to think about them. I like that. I use on-one software stuff. Again, a number of applications I like there. Um, I have some plugins from different people for Lightroom, like um, uh, profiles and stuff from Visco, VSCO. Those are amazing. Red Leaf Boutique, I like those a lot. I'm sure I have others I'm not thinking about. And with that stuff, I like to mix it up as well. Meaning, I know some people sort of have their thing, and they're like, I always do
Hmm.
these things. But what I've found, because I shoot most natural light, and that's always changing. Like the light behind you is really white and kind of bright,
Hmm.
but then there could be some haze in the sky and it will turn a little bit yellow and orange. So one profile just won't work. It doesn't work in both for both types of light. So anyway, I intentionally have different kinds of plugins and presets and stuff. Not profiles, presets is what I was looking for. So I can mix it up. Because I find it's really important to sort of listen to the image. It sounds weird, but to kind of
No.
be like, hey, like, well, what do you need? Not what am I going to impose on you, but what does this photograph need? What's the voice of this? And there's a person in it, going edgy and may not be the right fit for that person and that light. So anyway, again, long answer, but
No, no, yeah, I totally, I'm the same way, the listening to the image, and I have a bunch of plugins. I always like to think of them as like chemical baths, like back in the darkroom, right? Where
yeah,
you
yeah,
just like, well, I'm gonna dip it in Nick for a little while, and then like dip it into on one, and see where it goes, and sort of like kind of figure that sort of stuff out.
right,
And yeah, like I really liked what you said about listening to the image, which we keep coming back to that's that
yeah,
extra sort of skill's not the right word, but
yeah,
that's an extra little component in photography in general that it's tougher to learn than you think, right? I mean,
yeah,
like it's you go through. I now looking back at some of my photo education and stuff like that, it's like, oh yeah, that's what they were telling me to do. Like professors and people like yourself, we're educators. It's that idea that like you have to grow that because there's no other way for you to be
yeah,
good.
and that I was talking with Brian O'Neill Hughes, product manager of Photoshop at Adobe. He was saying when they interview people for the Photoshop team, if ever someone says, I'm an expert in Photoshop, the interview stops and they're not a candidate anymore.
That's really
Yeah.
cool.
Isn't that amazing? Yeah.
That's amazing.
And that's from like people who know everything, kind of, but they think you can't know everything. Anyway, the reason I mention that is with all the post production stuff, I try to keep that in mind. There's always something to learn from someone. I learn stuff from my students all the time. Just it was 2 days ago, one of my students took one of my photos on Instagram and reprocessed it and sent it to me. And I was like, how'd you do that? And he taught me a few tricks. And, there's always new things to learn, and it isn't about mastery, but it is about experimentation, which is what I love how you said that. It's like these chemical baths, and you're like, well, let's try this out and see what happens. And it's
Right.
always that's the fun part about it.
That was always my line when I worked as a production. I was like, it's just pixels. I mean, like I can do it. We can always get them back. I mean, the raws. If the raws, you put the raws away, save them somewhere nice, and then just play. And then only thing
Yeah,
you could lose is time, but it's time doing something you enjoy. So
yeah,
find different stuff that works, and then later, I always get on these tracks. Well, like you said, like I always do this. I did get into like a track of like this is what I like, this is what I do to the photos, and then you push yourself to photograph something different, like you just change, and you're like, wow, nothing I used to do preset wise works with this at all.
right, right, right. Yeah,
Like I mean, this was different. It's like it's almost like a score to a film. It's like, okay, this music is not going with this scene at all. Even
right,
though I
right. That's
love this music, it doesn't
right.
go at all. And you got to go back and you got to say like, well, a little bit less here and sort of make that sort of stuff. And it's I find it to be a really fulfilling process. I never got the people that didn't at least want to play. I mean, there's not to sound offensive, but those photographers that are just like, if I can't do it in camera, I won't do it. Well, it's
Right,
like I respect that on some level, but don't you want to see? Like, don't you want to just play around? I mean,
right,
see what comes out. You never know.
right.
So It's
Yeah, the
a
whole discovery process I think is a ton of fun, and you learn things that you couldn't have learned otherwise. It's those, I find you push an image so far, and then you can kill it, but then you realize, yeah, but if I did 10% of that, that might be really cool. So I
exactly.
like that.
So, let's see. Well, we brought it up a little bit. Well, because this is an X-rite, let's talk about color a little bit.
Yeah, yeah,
Now, I don't know how to say this. Your palette when we were photographing on the beach,
yeah.
so much says like memories of beach to me. It really strikes me like the colors. Now, I guess it's a weird. Do you choose them, or is it just something that you sort of like accentuate, like you said, follow the image? Like, do you have an idea of like a color sort of feeling you want for the photo, or do you just like this is kind of how I remember it, and let me just massage it a little bit?
Yeah, that's a great question. Color is crazy important for me. I think it is for all photographers, but and I think like the way you said it, you associate a feeling with it or expression. To me that's really interesting. Images straight out of a digital camera aren't that fascinating to me. And I have to constantly tell myself that when I'm reviewing my work. Like, okay, it's obviously called raw for a reason, and then to 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 go with kind of your gut a little bit. So for me, it's sort of intuitive, and to ask, okay, well, what is the voice for this, or what is? I love the soundtrack idea. That's a really interesting one that you said. What's kind of the soundtrack for this one? And then always trying to, I mean, this sounds kind of weird, but honor the image too, and not overpower it.
Yes.
I mean, there's that saying, you can Photoshop something to death for a reason. You can, you know, go so go a little bit too hard. And what's interesting, when I show my students a lot of my own Photoshop work, like I'll show them things I can do, and then I'll show them stuff I do. And they're always a little bit disappointed because I don't do that much Photoshop work on my
Hmm.
images, Lightroom or Photoshop. And so for me, it's trying to find that subtle spot. And so equivalent of tuning a guitar, like you go sharp, you go flat, and then you get it in tune. Um, and so I'm always thinking about that versus like changing the octave of the string. I want to swing it. So anyway, I don't know if that answers the question, but
No, I think I get what you're saying. It's yeah, like we keep saying, it's a fine line, and you kind of have to find your line.
yeah,
Like it's an interesting way to be.
it
But
is. Yeah,
of course, on the color topic, I do have to
yeah,
ask
yeah,
about color management and how that impacts how you work, because my bosses
yeah,
are listening. So
yeah. Of
so
course. To the bosses, I'm grateful. I mean, because I use all the different calibration devices and the passport and all those kind of things, and in Color True on my mobile stuff. And for me, what I like with that, I think I'm a little bit different than a lot of the other colorati, in the sense of I kind of veer from like correct color probably more. I don't know, but I like that starting point.
mhm.
So I mean, a lot of people have explained it different ways, but I'm just going to go with cooking for a second. We go
Okay.
with cooking,
Yeah,
summertime,
yeah, sure.
barbecue
Barbecue.
or
Yeah.
something. But I always heard that post production's like seasoning or spicing, the food, the whatever you're grilling or the food you're cooking, and that you want it to complement, not overpower. But anyway, I always want to have that like starting spot, especially when it comes to skin tone, because the weirdest and the hardest color in the world is skin. And when that's wrong, a picture isn't authentic and it isn't believable. So for me, having those controls and color management, even the lights in my office, that's neutral, and that
Yeah.
my monitor is neutral, and I've profiled my printer sitting next to me, and all that, it allows me to then experiment, I think, intelligently versus haphazardly. And so when I'm tuning the guitar, I'm not just like, well, I don't know, where should I go? And it's a free-for-all. So anyway, yeah, so that stuff's really important to me. So to the bosses, I'm grateful that that they've created all these things, and they're huge. And for my students too, it gives us, I think, a common ground, and it helps you get better, faster. Otherwise, with all the guesswork and the wishy-washiness of it, um, you're starting over almost every time. if that makes sense.
No,
So
yeah.
for me, because subtlety is important. Anyway,
No, I
that was a long
really.
thing, but
No, no,
it's
I
really
love
important.
that. I loved what you said about being able to experiment intelligently because, I go out there and I teach this a lot, and at
Yeah,
the end I always get that question where it's just like, well, I do it if I want with color anyway, so why should I care? And I'm
yeah,
always like, well, so you're choosing very specific color. And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, so you're choosing a very specific color for a very specific mood. And they're like,
yeah,
yeah. And I was like, don't you want that choice to be reflected?
yeah,
And they're like, oh. And I'm like, yeah, I mean, like, if you want your photo to be purple, for whatever reason you want your photo to be purple,
yeah,
what if it looks blue on in when you print it, and then you lost all that work you did, and then
yeah,
you're just experimenting, just exactly wishy-washy, throwing it
yeah,
out there. And I like the way you put that about
yeah.
experimenting
Yeah,
intelligently.
and for me, I mean, the other thing I tell my students is like I'll bring in a can of paint, from like Home Depot or whatever, and I talk about how have you ever, and a lot of them have done this. You buy a can of paint and you put it on a wall, and you're like, oh my gosh, like that blue is much more red or much more green, whatever it is, and then you hold up one of those little color swatches, and just that, what makes color interesting is its nuance, its subtlety. You can have a blue which is really red, or you can have a blue which is really green, and it's both blue, but you know, getting the blue, which is kind of blue you want to work with, that's kind of our language. I mean, that's what we work with as photographers. So anyway, yeah, love
Okay,
that stuff. And
thank
and and I think too. I mean, for my students, I really recommend the Color Monkey. It's a great tool, good starting point, and strong results. And so that to me, at least for folks I work with, that's kind of the thumbs up one.
you. Awesome.
Yeah,
So I think we're gonna wrap it up in a little bit, but we do have the questions open. If anybody
yeah,
out there listening to us right now wants to ask me or
yeah,
Chris some questions, just submit them.
yeah.
And really quick, if you don't mind, I have to do as you mentioned, the Color Monkey. This is the Summer Full of Color, so we're running a bunch of rebates on all of the x-rite devices. So
Cool.
if anyone else out there sees this, it's a great time to buy. And we're going to be doing hopefully some more of these Google Plus Hangouts. And
Great.
let's see, I don't see. I'm checking the questions now. Well,
Okay.
someone's inviting you to Tunisia, so.
Okay. I would love to come to Tunisia. That would be great. And I do have a photo or two I could show. You
Oh
want me to
yeah,
do that real
that'd
quick?
be amazing.
Yeah, yeah. I'm gonna share my screen here,
Oh, that's amazing. Awesome.
and I think it's gonna look weird for 1 second, but can you see me yet?
Not yet.
Okay. Let me
There
go
we go.
back here.
We're up
Okay.
now.
We're on. Okay. I won't go too much, but I just want to show. I want to show a couple photos here. I'm just in Lightroom from last week of my buddy Mike Coots. And can you see the photo okay?
Yeah, we're good, man.
Okay. So, and just a quick story. This is Mike and his mom in Hanalei Bay in Kauai. And Mike's an amazing photographer. You got to check out his work, Mike, Coots. And when he was 18, his leg, or below his knee, was bit off by a shark. And here's kind of the photo, a little bit of the process, kind of like we were talking about. Let's see if I can get a better sort of zoom here. If I go, maybe this one, you guys can see that better. But for me, like cleaning up, there's just some random stuff over here on the left, and so Photoshop is just that little bit of pop or a little bit of fixing things that you couldn't really do well in Lightroom. So that stuff's key. The other thing I think in regards to shooting, this is Mike just by himself there on the beach. And this is at eye level, kind of looking down on him. And then I just got lower, a little bit more of a hero shot. And I like that one because Mike's a super inspiring guy, someone I look up to.
Yeah.
And so anyway, the reason why I wanted to share those, one, because they're just, a few days ago, and then two, they're related to color and summer and surfing, all this kind of stuff, and then thinking through shooting and post-production. It's both things are so crazy important. Yeah, and I'll leave it at that. There's obviously more photos, but
Oh no, yeah. Anything you want to show. This is great.
okay. Let me just do a couple more here.
Sure. Yeah.
Hawaii is kind of, I'll just pick a few maybe, kind of typical. It's a little bit cliche, the beauty. So whenever I go to places like that, I try to get other stuff as well. This is in the top are a few pictures of the ruins of a old sugar plantation, and then I went in a fascinating walk in a graveyard with the the gravestone on the left is from the mid 1800s. And anyway, just trying to find things that aren't just ordinary is really important, as far as the photo side. And I think as people are traveling, to keep that in mind. Yeah, get the obvious shots. I have those too, palm trees and ocean, but then look for other stuff as well. And yeah, and I think I'll leave it at that, just because we're sort of near the end. But maybe I should do.
We can go as long as you need. I mean, these are beautiful.
Okay.
I'm having a good time looking at them. So.
Yeah. Let me do. Let's say. Okay. Let's just do a couple photos. I like old-fashioned like slideshows and showing photos. I was doing a shoot at the beach, and one of the people there was really talented. She could do these handstands, so I started to ask her to do handstands and jump up in the air, and it's trying to figure out who the person is and how to photograph them, and it is so important. And like with this photograph, I'm just going to turn the lights back on, go to the develop module for a second. With this one, let's see if I can get it here. Oh my, I don't think the hard drive's plugged in with it, but let me try this guy real quick. Okay, we'll do this one. It's the same kind of picture, but this one, the before shot, my exposure was off, and then here's the after. And I think part of it, you were saying like, what do you do with color, and how do you think through that? What's the process? Like this was shot as the sun was dropping. It was amazing, but then the image, obviously, when I opened it up, didn't have that. And I went really warm and really bright and really tried to be a little nostalgic and stuff like that too. That a lot of the process in finding photographs and making them is doing those things and drawing that color out in a way that's sort of relevant. And I think I've shown these maybe before, but
oh man,
just go over to here's over the develop module for a second. And here's the original image. Zoom in a little bit on it. And again, it was like amazing, but then in post, bringing back some of that wonder, and there are a bunch of different ones from this set. But to me, trying to bring back that feeling that I had there. It doesn't mean you always go that far, but sometimes, especially I think in photographs related to summer is about feeling, and you have to get back to that, what that feeling is, and try to have those images have that quality. All right, well, I think that's good, kind of image-wise.
Oh, these are great. I think you may have. So I might have to go to the Jersey Shore this weekend after seeing these. It's the closest I can get.
Yeah, and then let me see. Oh, oops, is it going weird?
On me.
Okay, am I back now?
Yeah, you're back, man. So we actually, while you're showing these, we had a question, kind of an interesting one that came in from Veronica. She said, you went over it a little bit, but she said, why is Photoshop so important nowadays, and can we consider photos that are not Photoshopped to be good? Well.
Yeah, heck yeah. I mean, the answer is, of course. I think some of my favorite photographs have very, like I said, have more minimal post-production, but sometimes you have to do more. But I think the role of Photoshop. This is a bad comparison, but are you okay with a bad one?
I'm totally, yeah.
Someone told me once that Lightroom was sort of like their general doctor they go to when like something's wrong, like they have the flu or something, or whatever. But then Photoshop's more like going to your ear doctor when you have an ear infection, so it's a specialist. And so I think that the idea, the concept is right. That most of our workflow is now all about a tool like Lightroom. 90% of our time is there, or whatever it is. But then to also keep in mind, like with that one photo of Mike and his mom, well, I can retouch this out in Lightroom, but it's going to be more efficient, and the results will be better if I go to Photoshop. So do that. Go to the specialist. So I think keeping that in mind is really important from a perspective of being able to express and create meaningful photographs. And to use Photoshop in a way that you're not trying to be an expert, back to Brian's idea, because it's impossible to be an expert or guru at it.
Mm-hmm.
To use it for these little tactical tasks, which will help improve the pictures.
That wasn't a bad comparison at all, man.
Okay.
I think a lot of a lot of when I talk to people, Photoshop versus Lightroom, a lot of the problem is Photoshop feels like a really deep pool, right?
Sure.
That people are it's a little unnerving at first to like to
Yeah.
jump into, and
Yeah.
it's one of those really interesting tools where it's like there are 30 different ways to get from A to B. And there
Yes.
is really no like there's no right, there's no good. I just like that
Right. Right.
it puts the power back into your hands, right? So it's up to you what's good, really.
Yeah.
I mean, an important lesson to learn is to not worry about what other people call good photography. It's what
Right.
you want to put out there, and I love that about Photoshop being able to just have exactly any as broad or as exact a tool as I need to be. Like
Yeah.
sometimes people say you took that out, like I wouldn't have even noticed it, and I was like, well, it's my photo. I noticed it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the point.
Like I mean, you never knew it was there. So
Right, right. And to not be overwhelmed. I think that's key, is what's happening. At least a lot of my students are like, well, Lightroom I can learn in this amount of time. I'll
yeah,
never get good at Photoshop. And I say you won't.
yeah,
But you can get good at certain things in Photoshop. Getting good at Photoshop, I do think, takes a long, long time. But it's like, well, yeah, just focus on curves or retouching away blemishes and pick up these smaller skills versus trying to do it all. And I think that can really help. At least I've seen with my students, once they embrace that, I see their imagery just jump significantly. And they're not trying to be everything and do everything, but they're a little more thoughtful or tactical in their Photoshop work. And
yeah.
it's true even, I'm sure, with all your retouching, right? I mean,
Oh yeah. I mean, I was in Photoshop 8 hours a day for probably about 10 years.
yeah,
And so there's stuff I'm really good at, but then still occasionally, even up to like when I was finishing with that job, I would still have to go online. I would still have to find videos. I would still have to
right,
do this stuff to be like, oh, I got asked to do this, and
yeah,
I've never done it before,
right,
like,
right,
and it's embracing that need to constantly keep learning. You know what I mean? And
yeah,
then they're also improving it. So it's like,
yeah,
oh no, there's new tools I need to learn, and it's just you
right,
have to just sort of let that go and let it sort of. I think that's the danger and the beauty of that tool at the same time,
right,
right?
right,
Where it's like it can be whatever you want it to be,
yeah,
but and it can be as little as just removing something, or as
yeah,
big as completely changing the feel of a photo. But it's there, and
yeah,
I'm grateful for it. It paid a lot of my bills for
yeah,
10
oh
years.
yeah,
All
yeah,
right. Well, Chris, I
cool.
gotta say this was awesome, man. We should do
Yeah,
this.
good
We
to
should do
have.
this more often.
Definitely, definitely. Good time. Yeah,
Yeah.
it'd be fun to ask you some questions too, one of these, turn the tables a little bit.
Oh yeah, no, that'd be awesome. Maybe we'll do that.
I'd love to get some tips from you.
Oh boy. Yeah, we feel that we'll make a 10-hour hangout. But thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah,
And let's see. So at Chris Orwig on Twitter, and
yeah, yeah.
what other places do you want to direct people to see your
Yeah,
new?
I think just my name, Chris Orrig, you can find some of the things that I do, and then I have a bunch of training on lynda.com and other things out there if you just Google, want to find that. And for me, teaching's, like, I'm passionate about it, so it's great to connect with people in that way. And I do, I think back to, I think there's a side of photography which is casual and intuitive and open and explorative, and then there's the other side of really sharpening your skills. So anyway, I like to embrace both of those, and I think you'll find that in some of the stuff I do, if anyone's interested in digging into that content.
Awesome. All right, one last question before I let you go. Well, where are
Yeah,
you going next to make me jealous? I mean, I said the Jersey Shore.
yeah,
I mean, vacation or
yeah,
shooting? Where are you going next, man?
yeah. That's a great question. Um, I don't have anything on the immediate horizon. We had almost a month of travel, so Santa Barbara there's next. But I think home, for a little bit, which is nice. And Yeah, I'm trying to think. Well, I do have a trip up to Santa Cruz Mountains in Northern California, but yeah, mostly home. So looking forward to having some time around here.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's good too.
All right.
All right. Well, yeah, just almost 7 o'clock here, so we're gonna sign
Okay.
off. Thank you again, man. This was a genuine pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. Great to hang
All
out.
right. I'll
Yeah.
talk to you soon.
Okay. Okay.
Bye.